get started. Thank you. Good afternoon, salutations, hello everyone. Thank you for coming today to the Home Health Educational Series talk. And we are very lucky to have the esteemed Cathy Brown with us today. Yes.
Wait till after it's over.
There's extra payment under the podium for every special work. We're really lucky to, oh, come on in, thank you. We'll get you some PowerPoint handouts for those that are coming in. Thank you, everybody. This is a wonderful turnout. We are very excited. This is a very important topic that we all are part of. All right, so thank you for letting me intro. I'm going to hand it off. There are PowerPoints, and I do believe there are little questionnaires for at the end. So if you need help with anything like that, just raise your hand, and then we'll hand it off.
Thank you so much. Welcome. I'm actually stunned that there were so many people here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I'm attached. It's attached.
The name of the woman that just spoke.
Oh, Lori. Lori, you need to identify yourself.
I apologize, I didn't introduce myself. Lori Zeban, Director of Home Health and Wellness.
Oh, well.
Thank you.
I don't have a handheld mic. I'm connected up here. So if for some reason you're not hearing me, let me know, please. Okay? But thank you so much for coming. As I said, I'm just surprised that there are so many people, and they're making more handouts to give out.
They're being and handed out.
Oh, they're made already and handed out? Okay, thanks, Bonnie. I'm Cathy Brown, and I am a nurse. I graduated from nursing in 1962 and went into hospice and palliative care nursing in 1992. Became nationally certified in 1996. I facilitated in a grief group for 11 and a half years at my church. I started that in 1999. I became certified in bereavement facilitation in 1999. And here I am. I'm actually retired, I think, and but I've done a lot of grief teaching in the nursing schools and here in the Valley to the community. And I was surprised when Westminster asked me if I would, do a talk on this particular topic. It's not anyone's favorite topic. It takes a lot of courage to come. A lot of you, not a lot, but several of you have had very recent losses. Some of you have had losses in the last year, and some of you in years gone by. If for any reason what I'm saying is making you uncomfortable or weepy, you have permission, my permission, to leave the room. And I have designated a couple of people to follow you out just to make sure you're okay. This is something I do every time that I give this talk. So, I'm going to ask you to hold questions until the end because parts of this topic is going to be interactive. And so, if you have this urgent need to talk, you're going to have to answer my questions. So,
Face this.
I have to face it.
No, your clicker, face it towards the back.
Face toward the back.
The back,
Your
Oh,
clicker.
face it this way?
yes.
That works.
It's not turned on.
Somebody will put it for you. It works really well.
Here we go. Loss. Loss is a part of living. Loss will be sudden. It can be unexpected. It'll be eventual. And we're going to have an interactive piece about talk. Catherine. And let me introduce Catherine, who is going to describe for me and she works. Do you want to tell them a little bit about yourself?
Oh, okay.
You have to talk to my chest. It won't be the worst thing I've said today.
Oh my
The
God.
worst thing I said, I went to Ann and I said, Ann, will you please turn me on? And I was, and of course I didn't get it for a few seconds.
Hi, everyone. I haven't had the opportunity to meet all of you quite yet, but my name is Catherine. Oh, take your mask off. Thank you. Can you hear me better? And I can hear myself better, so that's a promising sign. But I haven't had the chance to meet all of you yet. My name is Catherine. I am the new home health RN charge nurse. So if you need anything, call your friends at home health.
So what I want you to do, we're going to talk about losses and the different losses. I had someone say to me, I've not had any losses. And, you know, I was a little surprised, but, you know, it is what it is, right? So just call out any losses that maybe you have personally had or you know that someone else has had, and Catherine's going to scribe. And then we're going to take these sheets of paper, which are large Post-it notes. I love Post-it notes. And we're going to put them on the walls around so that you can look at them later if you want. Okay? So, anybody?
Roger.
I'm sorry?
Roger.
Roger, spouse, right?
House.
Yes.
Children, child.
Son.
Son, okay.
Uncle.
Child,
Uncle.
Sister.
Uncle.
uncle, sister,
Sister, yeah.
sister,
Granddaughter.
granddaughter,
Grandson.
grandson,
My hearing.
your hearing. Thank you. You know, these are losses, right? Loss of hearing, loss of vision.
Good looks.
Catherine, put that in big letters. Good looks. Who else? Pet. Yeah, we're going to talk about loss of pets a little bit later on. Yes. Suicide, death by suicide.
Sold the car.
Daughter-in-law,
Car.
She said sold the car.
sold the car. Who said that? You know, this is a loss. Right, selling the car. Because what does that signify? Loss of independence. I just had somebody say to me the other day, I could get out and go do this myself if I had my car. But I don't have my car any longer.
Mobility.
Mobility.
Yeah, she does.
Divorce. Yes.
Friend.
Pardon?
Friend.
Friends.
Yeah.
Brother. I think we mentioned that.
Also losses began during the pandemic.
Who said that?
I did.
The COVID, the loss, life's transitions, right? When we were in shutdown, we had to stay in our apartments. Our food was delivered to us in the apartment. That may have been the only person we saw that day. Now, I moved in the week they shut down. I didn't even have all my furniture at that point. Didn't have my furniture until the following year, the beginning of the following year. So I had 2 chairs, and I had boxes in my living room because I couldn't lift the boxes to get them out into the storage area.
Did you cry?
I didn't cry. You know what? I never cried once during that pandemic. Thank goodness that we had a library here,
Yeah.
because I read, and I listened to music, and I watched TV shows that I'd never seen before. I watched so much TV that I thought, oh my golly, I mean, go nuts, just sit here and watching TV. Okay, so there are a lot of losses in life. right? We all recognize that. And it is inevitable. I will tell you that approximately 10% of the world population will die suddenly. It's just part of who we are, right? So there may be some in here who will die suddenly. But we all experience losses throughout life. But do we process those losses? Do we process the loss of a car? Or not? Pardon me? I'm sorry?
The volume of the volume.
The volume, this is not working?
It's working. Doing well.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Or does the fact that we don't process have anything to do with some of the major losses that we may experience in our life? Reactions to loss. Have any of you heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, she's fairly well known throughout the world. And she identified these 5 reactions to loss. I had the opportunity to go to a conference in the end of the 60s in San Francisco and hear Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she very systematically said, this is what you're going to go through. The denial, the anger, the depression, the bargaining, and finally acceptance. She held on to that belief for most of her adult life. When she moved here to the Valley several years ago, she retracted that statement. And she said, I was wrong. And she had written books on this. She said, I was wrong. We don't systematically go through those 5 reactions. We may only go through 1 or 2, and we just not necessarily move on to the next one. I will tell you that I've looked after patients, being a hospice nurse, who stayed in denial. They were in denial from the day they were diagnosed until they took their last breath. The problem with that, the challenge with that, is that they didn't want to talk about it. And the families weren't allowed to talk about it. So they walked around on eggshells so that their loved one wouldn't hear them talking about it. So it really makes it for a very complicated grief pattern. Okay, definitions of key concepts. And there are 3: bereavement, grief, and mourning. Bereavement is the event, whatever that event may be. It may be the death of a loved one. It may be losing your home by fire. It may be, somebody mentioned suicide earlier, it may be death by suicide. But there are a lot of different kinds of events that will create a loss. So, what we need to, I guess I could advance on here. The cultural characteristics. We're very fortunate that we live at Westminster and we're surrounded by all these you beautiful people. I have to tell you, I have met more people in the last 18 months than I would have met had I stayed at home. And it's been wonderful. My family is thrilled that I'm in Westminster and they don't have to worry about me and come and do things and stuff like that because they know that it'll all be done by the people of Westminster. But we have got different cultures. And if there's a culture that's here, you know, a couple or a single person that you don't know very much about, sit down and have a chat with them and ask them about their culture. Talk to them. People like to talk about their cultures. And I dare say that all of us in here, even if we were all born in the United States, and I wasn't, I'm from Montreal, what was it like growing up for you? And did your family talk about death and dying, or grief, or not? And if they didn't, then this is what you grew up with. And as you reached an adult, you may not feel very comfortable talking about that. If your family was very open about it, and actually took you to funeral parlors or to funerals or memorial services, then you're more active and feel freer to talk about it. But it's different for everyone. And remember, the family dynamics, they're all different. And that's what makes us all so interesting, I think. We're all unique. Our grieving journey will be as unique as we are. Grief. Boy, it's hard, and you have to keep almost doing back bends. The emotional, mental, physical, and behavioral response to loss, but it's what we feel. What are the emotions that you're feeling with this loss? Is it anger? Is it depression? Is it guilt? Are you accepting of what happened with this event? Now, some people will be, and some won't be. But it's all part of this process. To effectively grieve, we actively take it on, and we embrace the pain. If we passively grieve, we may not get to the end of the tunnel. And what we want to do is get to the end of the tunnel so that we can incorporate what the event was and how we felt and what we're doing about it as we move forward. You can't go around grief, you can't go through it. You have to go through it, you just can't jump over it. It doesn't happen. Are there people who don't grieve? Yes. Grief is cumulative, so future losses may actually have an impact on previous losses if you have not actively grieved. Is it hard? Absolutely. Grieving is probably the hardest work that we do as human beings. There's nothing easy about it. You get lonely? Absolutely. You get depressed? Yeah. Are you sad? Yes. Do you wish things were different? Yes. But sometimes you're accepting of the loved one dying, if that's the event that took place, and you're okay with it. Mourning. Mourning is the process of adaptation. Is what do you do? What do you do with the process? Do you do anything, or do you just sort of let one day go by into another and do nothing and just think, well, this is what it is? You know, it's 2 weeks since he died or she died, and those of you who have had loved ones who have died know that there's a lot of paperwork to be done after the death of a loved one. I mean, it's almost overwhelming, and you need help. So what do you do with this process? Again, we're very fortunate that we live in Westminster with this community, and there is so much, there's a plethora of activities offered here at Westminster. We have staff who are very friendly, who will do anything for you. They'll say, can I help you? Is there anything more that you need? Then we have this activity department where you can draw, you can paint, create hats. I mean, I haven't been to the activity department. I'm not creative. This is not one of my strengths, trust me. And I think whoever runs that activity department, they do not want me coming in there. But I appreciate everybody who does that. And when I first came here and I met some people, they were all artists. And I thought, oh my gosh, you have to be an artist to live here? This isn't going to work for me. So process is very important. So play bingo, play cards, go to the activity department and draw and what have you. We have a woman here whose husband died recently, and she took up painting. And now she paints almost every day. And she just stands in front of that easel and is able to pour herself into that painting. That's coming from her core, coming from her heart. And is her husband present with her? She feels his presence. And then gives her paintings away to her family. when she comes alongside someone else who maybe has lost a loved one, she can share with them what she's done. So there are any number of activities that you can do. And mourning doesn't mean that, at the end of the year or 6 months or whatever, that you're going to be done grieving. For a certified hospice Medicare facility, they have to offer bereavement, and it's offered for 13 months, either one-on-one or in a group. And that's to get you beyond the anniversary of the event. That's to get you beyond birthdays and maybe your wedding anniversary, any holidays, and then to the 13th month. And then hopefully, and if you need to continue, you continue, but hopefully you've learned some coping skills and you're able to move forward. Types of grief. I'm going to talk about anticipatory, uncomplicated or normal, complicated and disenfranchised. So anticipatory grief. For the family, usually with anticipatory grief, we will get the social workers involved. And so here the same thing. If you're in anticipatory grief, we have our social workers involved in helping you process, talk through it, give you some, tools to work with it. And because we all have anticipatory grief. If we're given a diagnosis on a certain day, our family, they already are going into anticipatory grief, even if they're not able to articulate that or identify it. The same thing with the patient or the resident. The day that you get a diagnosis, you're going into anticipatory grief, and you're thinking, oh my golly, I wonder when it will happen. It is a common word that's used for death. People don't want to use death. Some Native American tribes, and I don't know if we have any Native Americans here. In Canada, we call them First Nations, but they're all different. And some of them, you don't talk about death or dying. It's just taboo, and I learned that the hard way. So, patients, residents, or loved ones will question, when will it happen? When will I die? And we don't know. The doctor may say to you 3 months or 6 months or a year or whatever, but that's not necessarily so. Sometimes it does happen. I had a man who was diagnosed with a very aggressive, rare form of cancer, and the doctor said 3 months. When I went to visit him, he was in bed, and I said to him, how long have you been in bed? He said, about a week. And I said, and what are your plans? He said, well, I'm going to stay in bed. And I said, can you share with me why you're going to stay in bed? He said, well, I don't want to die walking around in case I hurt myself. And it took everything I had not to laugh or smile. And his son said, Dad, do you realize what you just said? And he said, well, it's true. And he said, Dad, if you die and you fall, you're not going to hurt. You're going to be dead. Dad is dead. And he said, oh. And I said, out of the bed. Can I tell you, he lived 18 months. I actually discharged him off hospice and then readmitted him, and he died a month later.
Wow.
Actually, in the parking lot of the casino out by Fountain. I said to him, I can't go into the casino. Not with my name badge on and carrying my nursing bag. And he said, well, where can we meet? And I said, well, we'll meet in the parking lot. So he sat on the hood of my car while I checked his heart and his lungs and discharged him. Uncomplicated grief. This is considered normal grief. And John Morton, who's a well-known educator and author, presenter, has written many books on grief and grieving. And he identified the 4 tasks of normal grief, and that's accepting the reality of the loss and experiencing the pain, and gosh, I can't see that, and adjusting to the environment and reinvesting the new reality. Intellectually, we know that the person has died, or intellectually, we know that the event has happened. We may not be prepared for it, we may be in a state of disbelief, but the event has happened. And if it's a death, then we may not realize it or accept it until we go to the service, the funeral service, or memorial service, or we pick up ashes. And then we realize what's happened. Experiencing the pain of grief, not everyone is going to experience the same intensity of pain. And this is raw pain. When someone is experiencing an event, and it's just, days, the day of, or days after, then believe me when I say that they're experiencing raw pain. It is difficult. They need a hug. I always ask permission if I can give a hug, because not everybody wants a hug. And then adjusting to the environment, rediscovering hope. What does that look like? How do we rediscover hope? Now, this doesn't all happen in a 24-hour period. This takes time, okay? Weeks, months, may take a year. But if you do some other things like getting involved and talking to other residents and activities, it does help you rediscover hope. And then gradually you'll learn to create a balance in your life with the loss of the loved one, if that's what the event was, and then as you move forward. Making new friends is a wonderful place to be able to make new friends. You can't walk down the hallway without someone saying, "Hi, how are you doing? I've never seen you before. What is your name? Well, how long have you been here?" I mean, those first 4 or 5 questions are pretty much all the same. Then when you tell them that you moved in when the week they shut down, they go, "Oh my God, that must have been awful." Well, you know what? It maybe was not the best of life, but it wasn't the worst either. There's no timeline for someone grieving. It's not 6 months, a year, 2 years. And the outside community, oftentimes, when someone is like maybe 6 months post the loss of a loved one, they'll say, you just need to get a life. You need to move on. How insensitive talking about grief or loss. As I said, give that person a hug with permission. Just ask them. It's important that people tell their stories over and over and over again, because that's all part of the healing process. And that will help them. And sometimes families don't want you telling the story over and over and over again, because they know the story. They've heard it so many times. And so they think, enough is enough. But it's the one important thing for you to do, is to tell that story repeatedly. Complicated grief. I'm going to spend a few minutes on this. Absent grief. Absent grief is probably the most common forms of grief. This is also considered pathological grief, but the most common forms of grief for a couple of reasons. One may be because the expectations, if you're still working, you go back to work in 3 to 5 days, and the expectation from your supervisor is that you're going to be productive. Now, how many of us were productive when we experienced the loss of loved ones and went back to work 3 to 5 days later? Not very. It's so hard to focus. I mean, you're so forgetful. You keep, losing. I had an attorney one time who was a survivor, and she went back to work, and I was going to visit her the day on her first day of work. And so she got all dressed up. She said she wanted to put on her power suit and let everybody know in the office that she was just fine. Well, when I went to see her, she said, "You just aren't going to believe the day I've had. I had my suit on, and I had my red shoes. And I was so proud of myself. And I came downstairs to put my shoes on, and I only had one shoe at the bottom of the stairs. And I thought, well, what the heck have I done with the other shoe?" She said, "Cathy, I looked and looked and looked. I retraced my steps, couldn't find that other shoe. I came home from work to pour you a little glass of wine, and we could have some cheese and crackers. I was finished with my workday, so it was okay that I could drink some wine. And she said, what do you think? I opened the refrigerator, and there was my red shoe. Forgive yourself when you get forgetful. It's okay. It's just all part of it. The other thing to remember is that it's hard to believe that someone has, let's say, died or that an event has happened, and there's other crises going on, and there's so much going on in their life that they're just not able to show emotion. And that's absent grief. And then we go on to inhibited grief. Now, inhibited grief, all that really means, I'm going to give examples for each of these grieving patterns. There are 7 of them. Inhibited grief happens when, let's say you develop headaches, and your husband had glioblastoma, which is a brain tumor. And one of his presenting symptoms were headaches. And you think, oh my gosh, I've got the same illness that so-and-so had. And so they go on for a couple of weeks and they stew about this and the fact that, boy, they're just not going to be around for very long. Until a friend suggests to them, you know what, go to a doctor. And she goes to the doctor and tests are done only to find out she's fine. Her brain's fine. What she's got are headaches, but it's part of the grieving process. There are so many physical and emotional and mental and psychological symptoms that we can develop in the grieving process. Headaches is one of them. Loss of appetite, not sleeping well, sleeping too much, staying in bed all day. This is normal. Depression, isolating yourself, just wanting to stay in your room and not come out because you don't want to talk to anybody. You don't want anybody to talk to you. All part of the grieving process. The third one is delayed. Delayed grief can be weeks, months, years. I had a woman who came to my support group who was in delayed grief 25 years. And it was the longest that I had ever heard. And what happened was at the age of 15, she was with her mom and dad and sister, and there was a car accident, and they were killed, but she was not.
Oh.
She went to live with an aunt and uncle who were just very nurturing. They just couldn't do enough for her. And when she would start to cry, they would say to her, honey, don't cry. Everything is going to be just fine. And they said that so much that she just sort of stuffed everything. She buried it. Have any of you ever stuffed feelings? Buried feelings? We probably all have, right? Because we don't want to deal with it. And then she went back to work and she had more trouble working and trying to be productive. And 4 months later, her friend said to her, I just don't understand why you're having so much trouble. And they were all taking a piece of her work so that she wouldn't be fired. And then she told the story. They didn't know the story, but her mom and dad and sister. And it was suggested that she go to a grief support group. And she came to mine and told the story. But 25 years of delayed grief. Conflicted grief. Whoops. That's okay. Conflicted grief is when we see domestic abuse in a home where the abuser, I had a patient, the man, he was the abuser, wife was the primary caregiver. There were 4 children and they had all been abused. And the wife said, when the last child leaves the home, I'm going to file for divorce. I can't live with this any longer. And she had stayed with her husband because she wanted to get the kids out of the home. Well, by golly, the week that she was told by her youngest son that he was going to leave, he was going to move to another city, her husband was given this diagnosis of cancer, and the doctor said, it's aggressive, and he's not going to live very long. And she thought, well, I can't leave him. I mean, what would that look like to everybody? Because she didn't want anybody to know. Her own family didn't know. Well, as he progressed, and that disease pathology progressed, and he was needing pain medicine, she didn't want to give it to him. She wanted him to suffer like he made her suffer. So I went in one day and she said to me, Cathy, do you think I'm a bad person? And I said, why would you say that? And then she told me the story. I mean, it was just heartbreaking. And so we were able to get her husband admitted into one of our hospice inpatient units, and we were able to get social worker involved and get her into some really deep, detailed therapy, which is what she needed because she had put up with this for so long. Chronic grief. Chronic grief is when the intensity of the pain is the same 15, 20 years later, maybe 10 years, as it was the day the event happened. I had a woman I went to visit, and she normally came to the door of the station, come to the door, but the back door was open, and I went in, and I went into her bedroom, and she had this altar. It was a table probably as long as this, with this beautiful altar, a cloth on it, and she had a picture of her husband, and she had candles, she had his pajamas on the table, she had his shaving equipment on the table. Now, can I tell you, the man died 18 years before? She had his toothbrush, his toothpaste. The enamel on the toothpaste tube was peeling off. That's how old it was. But she was grieving as deeply that day as she was the day it happened. That's chronic grief. The next one, Anna's going to go fix it. The next one is unanticipated grief. Unanticipated grief is grief that happens suddenly. We just don't expect it. The best example is 9/11, right? New York City, Washington, Shanksville. I had the honor and opportunity to go to New York after 9/11 to do some grief work. It changed my life forever. The first woman that I met and talked with said, I don't know who to grieve for. And I thought, wow, what an interesting statement to make. And I said, can you tell me more? And she said, well, my mother-in-law had a massive stroke in the middle of July and died. My husband was diagnosed with lung cancer the end of July, 1st of August, and died 8 days later. My mother, who had been battling breast cancer for 2 years, died the following week. And my 41-year-old unmarried son, the youngest of 5, was killed in the North Tower.
Oh,
And I thought, wow, so much loss, all at the same time. And that's when there are major crises going on, and that's, we don't know a lot sometimes about the deeper things that are going on in each other's lives. And we just are recognizing the immediate crisis or the immediate loss. But so many times there are other things going on. And so it pays to ask, is there anything else that you're dealing with that you can share? Now they may choose to share, they may not choose to share. And then the last one is abbreviated grief. And this may be when a husband is looking after a wife and she's got dementia or Alzheimer's and has looked after her for many, many years, and then she dies, and his grieving process is relatively short. Now, why is it relatively short? It's relatively short because at the time of diagnosis, he had a loss. At the time of functional diagnosis, he had a loss. Social diagnosis, a loss. Mental diagnosis, a loss. So he's grieved all these years. And then when she finally dies, that grieving is short. And he may take off, being social. He may elect to go out with another woman, whatever. And people are so quick to judge. How dare he? They must not have had a happy marriage. Or how could he even think about doing that? We've got to remember, first of all, to be very sensitive to each other. But the man's been grieving for maybe 10, 15, 20 years plus. So, and we want to move forward, create, use some of our tools and coping skills to help us move forward. Disenfranchised grief. A term describing grief that is not acknowledged as legitimate by society. Give me some examples of disenfranchised grief. Anybody?
Loss of the stock market.
You know, I hadn't thought about that one. But it's legit. What else? Bless you.
Thank you.
The death of, I can't remember his name, he killed his girlfriend,
Oh,
and then they found his body.
oh, yeah. Gabby.
Yeah,
Gabby Petito.
Oh, and down in Florida,
yes.
she's talking about the death of the girlfriend,
Yeah.
No, but.
and then his body was found just a few days ago, last week.
And I didn't know, sorry for him.
Well, and I don't know, you know, we don't know the whole story, but I don't know that a lot of people are going to feel sorry. I don't know where society is going to play a part in this, but they may not have any sympathy. What are some other
Loss of a pet.
loss of a pet?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you know, there are those of us, we have maybe never married, we've never had children, but we have a pet. And that pet is our family, right? And then we lose that pet. And sometimes people just don't acknowledge that. Society as a whole doesn't acknowledge it. I had a woman who lost her cat, who was 21 years old, and she came to my grief support group. And the rest of the members of the grief support group, I'm going to tell you, we're not necessarily kind to her. Because they were there talking about, you know, I had one person there who had been a student at Virginia Tech, and you remember when they had that rampage?
Yeah.
Students were killed. Well, one of her friends was killed. And another couple whose son had died by suicide. And so this woman with her story about her pet. And I was able to talk to her, because we do have pet grief support groups here in the Valley that you can go to. Hospice of the Valley does one every month, after years and years. So we just need to be, you know, careful. What are some other examples? Yes, Amber.
Maybe the loss of feelings of safety that we had at an earlier time, like in the 50s, when we could let our children run out free and things like that, that we don't have today.
Yeah. What about the LGBTQT or the LGBTQT community? There's more recognition now, more support, but as a whole, society has trouble with that. Yes?
Parental alienation, grandparent alienation.
Yes. Yeah. You know, and when there's a divorce, oftentimes if you've developed a relationship with your previous in-laws, ex-in-laws, that's not recognized if you can go to the memorial service or funeral service. Incarcerated people. I could talk an hour just on that, but we did have a man who was incarcerated, and the only family member he had was a sister. And we actually prepared a case and went before the judge to get permission to get him out of the jail and into one of our inpatient units. And I'll tell you, the governor at the time was not happy about this, and she said, well, what if he goes out and kills someone? This man couldn't even get out of bed. He was, you know, I mean, he couldn't raise his head or anything. Anyway, we did get permission, and we got him out and got him into one of our units. And his sister sat at his bedside for the 2 days that he lived. And then he died. The last thing he said to the nurse was, thank you for this. This is the first time a family member has touched me and hugged me. And you have no idea how important that has been. Yes?
Well, the first time I ever experienced grief, I had no idea what it was, because my mother was crying because somebody named Roosevelt died. And he was the president. And I had never seen my mother cry, and I felt this something, but I didn't know what it was. Now I can call it disenfranchised grief, because she adored this man, and he was gone, and now I saw what was happening to her, and it was happening in me, but I didn't know what it was.
Yeah. Interesting. And you still have this memory.
Oh, big time.
You know, it's a few years ago, right?
I did.
It's good. That memory is good. Okay. Styles of grieving, feminine and masculine. And women can go into Starbucks, sit at a table, have a cup of coffee, they can chat, they can cry, they can laugh, and walk out of Starbucks and feel, you know, pretty good. Men do not get off on that. There's no way men are going to go into Starbucks, sit around a table and cry and laugh and feel better about that. Men are the protectors, you know, they want to fix everything. A lot of times we'll look at men and think how stoic they are. I've had many men say to me, I've done all my crying in the shower so that nobody could hear me in the room. And they just wanted to be alone in that grief. So we all grieve, but we're all unique, and it's going to be very different styles of grieving. Factors influencing the grief process, our personalities definitely play a part. We're all wired differently. And so that will definitely drive and direct and impact the grieving process. The environment, we live in Westminster, so we've got all of these people around us who will have our back, who will support us and encourage us. And how wonderful is that we have people, if we choose to allow them to nurture us and to support us and to just come alongside us. It's your choice of whether you choose to have that or not. The nature of the loss is also going to impact. So the more horrific the loss, the more sudden the loss, that's going to impact that loss and that event and make it a little more difficult than perhaps someone dying from a chronic illness or a terminal illness. Any other losses, and I talked about this a little bit ago, whatever else is going on. Do you remember a few years ago, they were handing out the pink slips and you'd lost your job? And how many people were handed pink slips? And dealing with the imminent death of a loved one and a pink slip, trying to decide, do I tell my loved one or don't I? Do I keep that to myself? This is stressful, very, very stressful. And a lot of times when things happen, there are so many events going on in someone else's life that we just are not cognizant of. The significance of the loss, what was the relationship of the person to you with the significance of the loss? And then finally, you know, do you have a belief system? Does it bring you comfort? If it brings you comfort, what is it that you do that brings you comfort, that helps you? If you don't have a belief system, you know, fine. That's your belief system, that you have none. Presence may be the greatest gift that we give to each other. What's helping another? Whoops, sorry. Being attentive, and I've talked around this a little bit. Sending an I care card or I think of you. Sending a thinking of you a year after the anniversary of someone's loss. Because people are always afraid that you're going to forget, you're not going to talk about it. And it's so important. Offer to help with practical needs. You know, go on a walk with them. Invite them to lunch. Invite them to dinner. Invite them to paint. Don't invite me, but invite people to paint or draw or color. Just to get them out and mixing with other people. Presence is powerful. And avoid cliches. It drives me crazy to hear these cliches. Well, he or she's in a better place. Well, it was meant to happen. You know, your house burning down was meant to happen. Just thank goodness that nobody was in the house. Excuse me? You've just lost your home. And you're telling me that it was meant to happen? I don't think so. And presents may be the greatest gift to each other. And I think here in Westminster, it's just so easy to do that and to just come alongside and to be, not to be do. So we need to be beings, not do beings. Okay? And now I want to talk about the grief timeline. This is a grief loss line, and I've got handouts that you're going to get at the end. And let me just share with you that here, and this is just an exercise. You don't have to do this. If you want to do it, that's fine. And I'm happy to meet with anybody who wants to do this after, sit around the table and chat and have coffee or tea. But the day that you do it, birth. So you would write down your birthday, the day and the date. And now is the date that you would put down for the day that you do the exercise. Now, the losses. What you could do is you put vertical lines, notch it with vertical lines. You can put the date up here and what the loss is down here. So let's say it was, I hope nobody's experienced this today, but today's date, 27th of October, loss of car, gave up car. But your losses are going to start when you're much younger, not today. Okay, does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay, any questions about this? You may be surprised how many losses you've endured in your lifetime. Because a lot of people don't think of the losses. You know, they think of important things like, you know, the death or, you know, whatever the event may be. But some of these other losses, you know, maybe having a son or a daughter going off into the military. This is a loss. They're still alive, but there's a loss. You aren't going to see them for a while. Loss of self-esteem, loss of status, loss of opportunity to serve others. We've got some losses listed up here. Loss of loved ones. You know, if you've relocated, maybe the loss of the CPA or attorney or your doctor or your dentist. Or if you've moved from the East Coast to Arizona, you got to find all these people again. So you're busy calling strangers even because they've been recommended. And it's difficult. Okay. And let me just, in closing, just say that, remember that grieving is an active process. It's not a passive process. It's not a race. Everybody moves at their own pace. I believe there's one more step to grieving, and that's thriving. And that's taking, you know, all of the tools that we've got or that we're learning and incorporating that into our life as we integrate the loss of the loved one or the event into our life as we move forward. I am interested, and you all were given an evaluation card, that if you're interested in a grief support group, we would respond in having something done, set something up. I've talked to a bereavement counselor whom I know very, very well. She's excellent. She actually did a bereavement group back in the 90s here, and then it just sort of fell apart. But I've talked to her a week ago. She's willing to come back and start a grief support group for anybody who's interested, or for any of your fellow residents who may not be here this afternoon, but you think they might be interested. So I would ask you to write that on your evaluation card, okay? The other thing that I'm going to give you, and so I'm going to have someone come up and maybe a couple of people come up and pass out these grief timelines. The other thing that I'm going to give you is a paper dealing with, they can do it, Sally. Thank you, Sally, I appreciate it. Okay. And dealing with grief through the holidays. And I've put together just a little bit of information. Maybe that will help you. You know, we know that grieving can be overwhelming, but we also know that it can be really overwhelming during the holidays. And I talk about identifying, acknowledging the losses and COVID and the losses that we had with COVID. And then those are the primary, and then the secondary losses. And then experiencing the symptoms, and I've listed a few symptoms. And then I've also adjusting the personal attributes that may help, whether you've got, faith, hope, courage, patience, perseverance, and a lot of you have these. And, we just need to not set them aside, but just embrace them and use them. Sense of humor. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have a sense of humor. And I've had many losses in my life. The grief is present. Another thing you can do is invite people who knew your loved one, if that was the event, and have them share a story that you may not be familiar with and you're hearing. And that's very comforting and encouraging and very supportive. Those who have had people die by death by suicide, this is a very difficult event. Generally, it's very unexpected. Whether the person has attempted tries before or not, whether they've been depressed or not been depressed, very suddenly you find out that this event has taken place. I want to, pardon me? About what? Oh, does everybody have a comment card? Put your hands up if you don't have a comment card. There is a program that's offered here to Westminster Village, the Phone a Friend program. But they have a section in this program for people who have lost someone by suicide. And that you can call and chat with them and as necessary. And I would encourage you to make use of that. You need to talk about that. A lot of times society just does not want to involve or acknowledge when someone's had a family member who's died by suicide. And it may be intentional. It may be that they just, maybe unintentional. I had a friend whose son died by suicide, and he strangled himself and died, suffocated. And she said to me, and I met with her for about a year regularly, and she said, I just hope that the ME, the medical examiner's report, comes back stating that it was unintentional, that it was an accident. And if it's an accident, I can accept it. If it's intentional, Cathy, I just don't think I can accept it. So, we deal with a lot of stress and a lot of pressure over some of these different events. And again, we just need to be sensitive to them and kind. Just treat people with kindness. And that's what we see here in Westminster. There's just so much kindness. And I just encourage you to keep doing that. And I, for one, feel very fortunate and gratified that I live here amongst you. And that I have you all to support me, and while I can support you. Questions? I know I went a little over. Do you want to pass these out too? Oh, you've already got the holiday ones? The holiday. Here are the holiday ones. We might need help. Cathy, do you mind? Catherine, you can give Cathy some. Oh, here, Teresa. Thank you. Okay, any questions? Yes.
Maybe an odd question. I was just wondering, is there a difference between sadness and grief? Sadness is kind of one kind of feeling, and grief is another kind of feeling.
Sadness is going to be right along with grief, with mourning, and with loss. So with the bereavement and the grief and the mourning, they're sort of all interchangeable words, although we have identified in as three main key concepts: the bereavement and the grief and the mourning. But sadness is just one of the feelings, the adjectives that you're going to feel.
questions, I'll come around with the microphone. Did we run out? Okay, tell Anna.
We'll have more at the front desk.
I need the other sheet. Yeah.
If you didn't get a handout, Anna will have some at the front desk after she comes.
This evening.
Did everybody
This
see that?
evening, not in 2 minutes.
Okay, anything else? Gosh, I answered any questions you might potentially have had. Amazing.
Oh, wait, one more question right first.
Well, again, I just want to thank you all for coming and sitting through this.
She's got a question.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
I have questions, but I would be reluctant to do it in front of a large group. So if you have a brief support group here, and we can sit at the table and express ourselves with a support group, I think that would be beneficial.
Put that on the evaluation card. Okay? Because this bereavement counselor is really excited. She has issues that she wants to bring up, but she doesn't want to do it in a large crowd. But she would feel more comfortable in a support group. I'm sorry, I should have repeated that. Yeah. Well, it's safe and it's confidential because whatever is said in the support group is confidential. It doesn't go outside, it should not go outside the room.
Any other questions Kathy can answer right now?
If you see me in the hallway, if there's anything I can do to help, just please stop me. And if you don't know me, just introduce yourself. I don't know all of you sitting in here, but I would love to meet you all. And I'm just more than happy to sit down. Any questions about the grief line, the loss line, I would be happy to sit down with anybody. And Frank, you and I are going to get together and talk. Yep. Okay?
Thank you, Kathy, so much. Everyone can leave their evaluation comment form on the seat and we'll come around. And the pens, sure.